as the playmaker and Ryan Paling as the power forward. But Ryan Paling also had an interview that he did at the beginning of the season, and I'm not sure, Josh, if you've listened to it, but he really demonstrated a lot of maturity and I guess awareness of what he brings to the table, where he very openly stated like I like my goal is not to be a star player in the NHL. I just want to be a reliable player that you can put out in every situation. Maybe my like star abilities will come later, but for the time being, I just want to be trusted. I want to get game time. I just want to play hockey. And he's also in much better shape coming into this camp than he was last year. So it should be fun to just see what happens with him because he's a bit of a wild card because he could start in the AHL or he could be a third line centerman. Like maybe he starts ahead of Jake Evans. It's not too likely, I don't think, but it's not impossible either. And the last guy, we have to talk about
Of
him.
course.
We kind of need to. Joshua Roy, the man that you share a name with,
Hmm.
a fifth round draft pick from this season, one of the younger players in the draft, who fell because he was 20 pounds overweight, but he went first overall in the QMJHL draft a couple years ago. This man came to camp not only in great shape, not only working basically as hard as players like Rafael Harvey Pinard, who are we are going to get to later because we love this kid. But like Jake Evans too, like he was working hard, he's in shape, and on top of everything, he's scoring goals. Like, what's your take on this Quebecois boy who is was cut and sent back to the QMJHL so that he can be ready for like the actual season? Like, what do you think of him, and what are your expectations for him this season?
Yeah, I think he could turn out to be really a big steal for Montreal going way down into the fifth round just because of the aforementioned the behavior, the lack of effort, the lack of physical fitness that he showed up. But he's really proved that he's willing to put in the effort and the work to get back into shape and to elevate his compete level to be up there with some of the bigger competitors on the team, like as we said, RHP and Jake Evans and things. So he like that was the big question coming into his draft was is he going to be one of those guys that has all the skill in the world but just doesn't doesn't put it together because he's dominated since he was a little kid, probably best player in all of his leagues, and then it comes up to get to the Q, you get to the AHL, where it's harder to dominate than the little AAA leagues. So he's really impressed me so far. Some of his plays on the ice have been really nice skill and the effort is commendable, very commendable for what has been said about him. And if he could keep this up, I'm not sure about this year, but in the coming future, he could be a big AHL star, in my opinion, and then maybe rise up to the NHL someday.
Yeah, like I watched a little bit of him this season, mainly because I was interested in his storyline because he was a first overall pick a couple of years ago, and because he was traded because of a lack of fitness. Like it's just an interesting thing to kind of follow. So I watched a couple of his games, and there was an observation that elite prospects and their scouting team made that I completely agreed with, and that was that Joshua Roy, like overlooking like all like the fitness issues and effort and whatever, he's a goal scorer. Like his shot is great. Like he has one of the better shots in that draft class. Like he's very good at putting the puck in the net or shooting in general. His bigger issue was getting into a position to use that ability. So this is something that we've seen with Cole Caulfield being amazing at, right? Of just as we were just talking about, like he didn't score in that first preseason game, but he got into the position to do so. And that was the exact opposite of what the issue was with Joshua Rosa this past season was that his shot was great, but like you're kind of just like trying to scream at at the screen of like telling him like go into that empty space. It's right there for you. Like you're going to be in a great goal scoring spot, and he just missed it. The big thing that I noticed, like beyond like obviously the fitness and the effort level, which were kind of shocking to me after I'd watched him in the queue, was that he was routinely going to the right spot spaces like consistently, and he scored a lot of goals just by virtue of being in good positions, right? Like we saw this especially in like the intra squad game of he had a gorgeous top corner backhand shot because he kind of placed himself in the low slot when there was a puck battle in the corner, right? It's the small details of just positioning and knowing how to use your strengths, right? Because in the end, if your strength is shooting, it doesn't matter if you can't actually use it, right? Like, why would it, right? Like, if you can't use your shot, doesn't matter. And I was very impressed with that. And I know some Habs fans were complaining about him being cut and they wanted to see more of him in preseason, which is fair. But at the same time, the QMJHL season begins on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And you want him to already get some chemistry going with his teammates in Sherbrooke. So I'm very okay with it. And he left a mark at training camp, and he's certain to be back next season. And we'll see. And this year in the queue, my bold prediction, I don't know if it's even that bold, 40 goals. I think he's getting 40 goals. So that's my.
Yeah, I think that's doable.
Asterisk, if he can keep the motivation of working hard in the QMJHL, like if that was something that was just there because he was in a professional environment, it might fade. But I'm really hoping it doesn't. And he's a very fun player. And everyone, I'll remind you that this is the 10th episode of the podcast, and it is a small panel today of just myself, Sebastian High, and Joshua Rosa, because everyone else was busy and or exhausted, which is very easy to understand at the end of September. It's a very busy month for many people getting back to work and the exhaustion of everything. But yeah, I guess we'll transition this to the next segment, which is my own. So I guess I'll introduce myself for the Prospect Heroes segment, and I'll be joined by Josh, who's replacing Scott Cowan as the panelist. So we'll just keep going with this panel of two.
I'll be your prospect sidekick.
I'm very good with that, and you're going to be the focus of this one.
The Prospect Heroes, Scott and Sebastian on Puck and Roll.
As always, the arrival of NHL training camps brings with it the usual feel-good stories and interesting developments that follow the PTOs and invitations that occur in the lead-up to every NHL season. In this case, 2021-22. The Montreal Canadiens will certainly have some expectations, or more so intrigue, placed upon them following one of the more magical playoff runs in team history last season, culminating in a trip to the Stanley Cup Finals, where they ultimately fell lost in 5 games to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Headlining the team's roster for the moment, however, isn't the usual mix of star players and depth options that comprise most regular season rosters. Rather, it's the lesser-known AHL and sometimes ECHL contributors doing their best to earn a shot with the parent club come the start of the regular season. In the Canadiens' case, AHL affiliate the Laval Rocket have taken matters into their own hands with the plethora of AHL contracted players they've added following an extremely successful 2020-21 season that culminated in a Canadian division title. So, with that being said, here's a quick look at a few of the AHL contracted / AHL contributors that make up part of the Canadiens training camp roster for the 2021-22 season. I think it goes without saying that the Canadiens didn't have the best start to their preseason schedule and a less than ideal 4-1 loss to the Toronto Maple Leafs on opening night. The Habs roster wasn't the typical Brendan Gallagher's and Josh Andersons of the last year's playoffs, instead relying on some of the Rockets' more reliable performers. Case in point, Laurent Dauphin and Alex Belzile. While many still see him as solely an AHL contributor, I think the time has come for Belzile to see more substantial minutes of the Canadiens this season, after finally proving himself as a reliable performer at the AHL level. Belzil's long and winding path to the NHL is one that has been well documented, but even still, the St. Eloi native has had to fight tooth and nail to ultimately earn that long-awaited NHL debut, going from a healthy scratch in the QMJHL, to the ECHL, to the AHL, and finally in that historic red, white, and blue jersey. While he's not an overly fancy or deeply skilled player by any stretch, there are few players as hard-working as Belzil, and it's that work ethic that's led to his reputation as the heart and soul of the Rocket over the past few seasons. Dauphin is a bit of an anomaly in the Canadiens organization, having proven himself as a reliable and talented AHL contributor, while similarly falling just short of an NHL return after nearly securing a full-time role in the 2016-17 season. A former second-round pick of the Arizona Coyotes, Dauphin is mostly known for being the other side of the deal that saw former Canadiens first-round pick Michael McCarron go to the Nashville Predators. With solid offensive abilities, a high IQ for the game, and great awareness of the puck as evidenced by his plus 16 rating for Laval last season, I think Dauphin is deserving of a shot at Montreal, making a long-awaited NHL return for a player who's struggled to find his footing over the past few seasons. Leading on from that, obviously Kid and Primos continued to raise suspicions after yet another less than stellar performance in goal for the Canadiens. Yet I think the jury is still out regarding his NHL future. While he's beginning to show why he was ultimately a 7th-round pick more and more, Primos' excellent numbers in the AHL should continue to serve his development well, and subsequently give the Canadiens more incentive to allow him to gain some confidence he still appears to be lacking in. In many ways, the Canadiens don't want to repeat as the Zach Fucale's and Charlie Lindgrens of yesteryear, and I feel as though Primo has a lot left to show the Canadiens and Rocket in 2021-22. While there wasn't a whole lot of note to take from the Canadiens' first preseason loss, Brendan Baddock managed to stand out in his brief tilt with Leafs forward Curtis Gabriel. Gabriel and Braddock are cut from similar cloths for the most part, but even still, the Alberta native struggled to hold his own against the smaller Gabriel. Ever since being signed by Montreal as a free agent last season, Braddock has been the perfect physical presence for the Rocket, while similarly not crippling them skill-wise like with David Brohl and or Mathieu Gagnon. While an NHL debut is extremely unlikely at this moment, Braddock still gives the Canadiens a backup plan in the event they need to bring an intimidating presence onto the ice against a bitter rival. Finishing things off here, while subsequently going back to some of the more AHL contracted additions, Gabriel Bourque and Denick Martel are, in my mind, the most intriguing signings of this offseason, as in many ways they shouldn't be on AHL contracts to begin with. With both players fitting the bill of smaller-ish energy forwards, both have similarly managed to carve out brief stints in the NHL, whilst posting remarkably solid numbers at the AHL level. Martel, a Drummondville native, is a 4-time 20-goal man at the AHL level, yet found himself a little but an AHL deal with the Binghamton Devils last season. In between a collective 13-game cup of coffee with the Flyers and Lightning over 2 seasons, Martel should project to be a key part of the Rockets' offense this upcoming season. As for Bourque, had Belzil and Xavier Ouellet not been on the Rockets roster this season, I would say the Rimouski native is the perfect, if not ideal, candidate for captain, having managed to secure a full-time role in the NHL for 6.5 seasons from 2011-2012 to 2019-20. In between playing a key role for the Nashville Predators at bottom 6 among other things, Bourque has been a steady, reliable two-way producer at the AHL level in his 2 full seasons, and in many ways has the skill set of a player far more talented than his numbers would suggest. With speed to burn, a lethal release, and surprisingly soft hands, I could see Bourque becoming a legitimate threat for the Rockets should he be able to put everything together and potentially see a return to the NHL ice down the line. So, with the 2021-22 training camps well underway for the Canadiens, there's a look at some of the AHL options Montreal has added to the roster for this upcoming season.
All right, so Josh, we are focusing this part not on anything Habs related because we're talking a lot about young Habs players in other segments of this episode, but you did something very special this week. Tell me about it.
Yeah, this week I got invited into me and the Puck and Roll podcast got invited into a OHL game as a member of the press. I got to sit way up in the press box with my little notebook, and I got to watch the Mississauga Steelheads play the Kitchener Rangers in the Kitchener Rangers, the odd, they call it there, the auditorium, the big old auditorium. And first of all, I'd love to thank the Kitchener Rangers organization and everyone that worked at the game so much. If you don't know about Ontario, we've just started the vaccine passport and no one really knows what was going on. There was a lot of chaos, but everyone working there was just so amazing at everything that they were doing. It was really a special night for a lot of people. There was the sold out crowd of 1,000 that they could have safely seated, and everything was done very safely and very COVID safe, which was great. It was stress free. It was such a fun time. The Fans were cheering at everything, even though it's just a preseason exhibition game. The atmosphere was electric. It was just so much fun to see live hockey again. You don't know how much you missed it until you go back.